Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Seibert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about in-laws.
In-laws.
Dun, dun, dun.
Some people are gifted really great in-laws, and some people are gifted
Not
less
so
than
good.
optimal.
I love that positive reframe.
And as a parent, I'm like, I'm going to be the
Mhm.
really good in-law when I'm older.
Yeah, but I guess we talk about this even with ones that are generally good, and because there's a lot of things that are at play here. Generational differences.
Yep.
There are cultural differences.
Attachment histories.
So it's really of how do we as a couple, a unified front, navigate our values that we want for our unit, when working with our in-laws, and what values of theirs we want to keep and not. And in this process, you can get different values and what you're willing to do. I look at this in the context of, I've had clients where, one is very from the United States, American culture, very individualistic, and their partner is from a collectivist culture where their in-laws are very much like immediate family. And so there's just a lot that has to be done in terms of navigating and understanding and, some
Talking
compromising.
It's hard, especially if one partner wants their family involved and wants to be close, and the other partner says, nope, not so much. This can be a really challenging one. And by and large, as I think about it, like a vast majority of the couples I work with, they talk about their in-laws at some point in therapy as some sort of a speed bump, right? I work with a lot of postpartum and pregnant mamas. And so does mother-in-law get to be in the birthing room? When baby comes home, how long until we have visitors? Can they stay with us? How long do they stay with us? It can look like my in-law is telling me how to parent, or they don't respect me as a parent. It can look all kinds of ways. And that's just one subsect. That's just with parenting. Then we talk about finances and houses and
or if you're not married yet, what the wedding's going to look like.
Oh, weddings. Woo,
or if they're willing to, if they're well off, of course, willing to give money, and do they hold it over your heads, and what are the conditions? And there's a lot, and also not just issues around the in-laws and the couple unit, but also between partners in the sense of, depending on how they grew up, they have expectations what family should look like, and their partners may not look like that. And then they might tell them, like, you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? I look at my wife and I'm like, why don't you call your parents more? And that's just not their dynamic, right? Where she's like, you're calling them so much. And I'm like, yeah, it's unhealthy attachment. Got it.
But it's also like extended family as part of in-laws, right?
Yes.
So like for ours, I am in close contact with a lot of my extended family. My husband rarely, if ever, talks to his extended family. Again, to me, that's weird. Like, that's not what families do.
Yeah.
And to him, that's our family culture. That's very much normal.
Yeah. And just thinking about, how do you define in-laws or like that extended family? Because again, from a collectivist culture, it might look different in how it's treated and how you want them involved, even financially. Right. I've had clients from like more of a collectivist background who say, well, my finances are my family's. And the partner who's not from that background is like, I want it to keep private.
Ours.
I want to keep it private. And I mean, little things like that. So this starts really with the couple unit and talking about it and understanding what you two want for each other and the values that you want to live out. And of course, these can change, but what are they in this moment? And then look at how they might line up or not with where the family's at. And when problems come up because of those differences, how do you want to manage them? And typically, whoever's parents that is, you want them to set the boundaries. You want them to be the one that manages and deals with that relationship first.
I encourage talking about this while you're dating, because if you are truly at an impasse, if you truly have very different values, that can be a signal that this relationship won't work long-term. Yeah. Because I've had clients where there's this belief of, well, I thought once we got married, it would change. I thought the wedding day would signal like for them to back off or whatever it is. That's not real. Okay. Wedding days, by and large, don't really change that dynamic. In some cultures or some religious backgrounds, sure, there's a giving away of the bride essentially. But by and large, attachment doesn't change. Involvement doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about this early on so you can work out the kinks or decide that we aren't compatible because of this really big area.
Wait, what do you mean? I thought we were told that once you get married or have a baby, everything's perfect.
Oh gosh, I wish. It's hard. And boundaries, right?
Yeah. Oh, there's your plug.
Oh, golly.
Well, and the thing I think about too, especially with the in-laws, is even later in life, what are your values as a couple, and whether you're willing to take them in during illness, and how much you want your partner to be involved with your parents if they're sick, or vice versa. This is an ongoing thing if they're still in your life, or and to some extent, because some people don't. I look at, gay couples, lesbian couples where, their families don't believe in that. So they kind of remove themselves, which is unfortunate.
It's so tough. Like my head is just swirling thinking about my own family, my own in-laws, of how do we do this and how do we do it well? There have been times when Chris and I have done it well, and there have been times when we haven't done it well. Right. And what can we learn from those moments? How do we do it differently?
And they're still there.
It's hard. It's an ongoing relationship. When you marry someone, you marry their family. That's a cheeky saying, but it's actually really true.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't just mean boundaries between like you and your in-laws, but boundaries with your partners. So for example, in my home, my mom, when she was alive, wasn't always kind. And so my husband would say, just cut her off. Like, why do we still talk to her? And in my world, I can't just do that. And it actually put a big wedge between my husband and I, because he was trying to dictate the relationship I'd have with my parents.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it. We just kind of told each other what it would be.
Yeah.
This is a big part of the boundaries too. How do we negotiate our individual relationships with each of these family members in a way that still respects our partner and our family?
Without telling them what to do that aligns with your expectations of what you might do. Or the partner who says you need to do this, but they won't do it themselves with their own family.
I don't know anything about that. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. Unless you win the jackpot where everybody's personalities just perfectly meld, you will hit a speed bump in this area.
Yeah.
If you're in a partnership.
Yeah. And in this discussion and talking about this, it first is, where as a couple are we willing to give concession that doesn't really sacrifice our values, but where are we willing to be flexible? And where are we going to put our foot down? And ideally, the partner whose parents it is, they're the first ones to do that. But if that doesn't work, there are times where you might, as a partner, be the one that has to put the boundaries up.
That first part's important. Where can I be flexible? It can't just be about what I want coming into this marriage or this relationship. I have to think about the other people involved. So long as it doesn't devastate my values or become an unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah. And let's talk about when it is an unhealthy dynamic, and say, one partner has a great relationship with their parents, but their partner doesn't have a relationship with your parents, and they're upset, they cry, they don't get along, even though you don't have that relationship with your own parents, your parents and your partner don't necessarily get along. And how do you validate your partner's experience without making it this, have to choose?
We never want someone to feel in the middle.
Yeah.
So how do we find that middle ground where maybe your partner doesn't feel connected to them and doesn't really want to be around them, and they're still your parents and still involved? So how do we find that middle space where there is involvement, but it still feels safe for both people involved?
Yeah. And that's part of the discussion of what am I, this is like, say this is the partner whose parents it is. They're going to, what are my concessions am I willing to make, and boundaries I'm putting with my own parents to support my partner?
I just think about all the topics this can come up with. It comes up with parenting choices. And I mean, there's like a million parenting choices.
Wedding venues and
how you spend your money, family vacations, family dinners every week, living near each other.
Whether your child is baptized or not.
The religion of your home.
Yes.
So many things.
Yeah.
And I can't stress enough how complicated this is and how unique it is for each couple. It can be tempting to look at our friends or look at our coworker and be like, wow, their in-laws are so great, or their relationship looks so great. Mine needs to look like that too. but each one is unique. Each person's personality is different. So it's going to be a unique relationship.
And some in-laws have personality disorders, and
It's true.
and that's a reality, and
Sure.
you try to make the best of it. So what does that look like? And to me, it all comes back to the couple unit. How can we navigate what this looks like? And in this discussion, as you said earlier, this might be the key of whether this relationship's going to work or not, depending on what concessions our partner's willing to give or not. And, we don't want to ask our partners to sacrifice their values.
Yeah.
So this is part of it, is like, okay, well, that's a value that probably will be through the remaining of our relationship. So this might not be something that I'm willing to live with, or it's something that I can live with. And this is a very hard thing to determine, especially if you're early on in the relationship and you're like making excuses for all the red flags. And but this one is very important because this is a big part, as you mentioned. It's integrated in a lot of choices we make, and especially when kids come along.
Woo,
So the boundary of what we want our relationship to look like, what values we want to instill, how we're going to be unified front and working towards our unit with our in-laws.
And that prioritization, right?
Yeah.
Is so coming from a female perspective in a heterosexual relationship, am I my husband's priority or is his mother? Right. So if we have differing opinions, are we united front, or is he going to lean towards his parents? Depends on culture. It depends on individualistic versus collectivistic. It depends on religion. There's so many factors that determine that. Can we agree on the prioritization? So once we're married, we agree that each other is our top priority, than our parents.
Yes.
Right.
If finished, I think that's more traditional for the individualistic culture that might like different for collectivists, where that's, that's not really the case. It's a lifelong relationship, and, integrated with more diffuse boundaries.
So the next piece I would suggest is get curious. When there's speed bumps, get curious about those. What's leading to them? Talk to the other person. So don't just talk to your husband, partner, wife, whatever. Talk to your in-law. Ask them what's bugging them. Ask them what they would like to see different. Try to find some of that curiosity about their perspective, share about yours, and try to find some mutual ground.
Yeah. And maybe this is my own belief, but ultimately I think the in-laws don't have any say. But as a couple, we might be willing of how much do we want to include that value system. And that's kind of being respectful in a sense of, okay, what is it that you're hoping for that would make you feel more comfortable with this? Not that our relationship's any of your business, but I'm willing to make concessions of the fact that, oh, you want to see your grandchildren. So, okay, how do we make you more involved? How do we actually tap into your strengths to make this happen? And really having that discussion and understanding what their needs are to help reduce tension over time. And that's where some sacrifices come in, again, not of the values, but maybe some other things.
And it doesn't have to be, okay, they say it, so therefore I have to follow it, right? Like I want to see my grandchildren every day. Not realistic. Right?
Some couples are like, yes, please take my children.
I have my days.
This is why it's different for everybody.
I think about holidays.
Yeah.
Holidays in our families, and for many, can be a really big source of tension if it needs to be, right? Of, say, Christmas. And Chris and I have decided that like Christmas Day, we stay home and it's just the four of us. We're not having either of our parents over, grandparent, none of that. And it's not against them. It's that we want that time just as our little unit. We can plan family stuff on the periphery days, days around it, but not on the day of. That value is starkly different than the beliefs of either of our families. They're very much on Christmas Day, everyone should be together. We should have food and fellowship. And so the first couple times, and probably even this year again, it didn't land well, and it won't land well. That doesn't mean we have to change it, but we're trying to find compromise in what other day could work that still we're not giving up that sacred time as a unit.
Yeah. And importantly is that in these changes, they're not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It can happen over time. It's going to take time where these boundaries, get established and everyone kind of on board of like, okay, this is just how it is. And we've been talking more in the direction of moderating the influence of the in-laws in the way of like, they want to be involved and we're trying to kind of keep that boundary and push in the way. But I've also seen the other way to where the in-laws are like, you're too much.
It's true.
You're relying on us too much. You're too dependent upon us. And that's another thing to have a discussion on. And that's where, the
Good
in-laws should, if you're, a grandparent, is saying, okay, setting your boundaries and being okay with the fact that, like, you're not failing your child because you don't want to be involved. You're setting healthy boundaries for them to learn to be more independent as a couple unit. And that's very healthy. But fostering into dependency of continually kind of responding all the time, this is where that dependence comes from. And how do we break that? And it's setting the boundary that's more healthy, where you get your freedom and sense of sanity.
That's an important distinction. Both people get boundaries.
Yes.
Boundaries are not unidirectional.
No.
We
do in our own world think so, but
we both get to have boundaries. And here's the thing about boundaries. People don't like them. So if you set them and they're reasonable, most of us can have a real assessment of what's reasonable and rational. If they're reasonable and the other person doesn't like it, their reaction is theirs to hold, not yours. Yeah. Now, no ridiculous boundaries here of barring any abuse. You're never going to see your parents ever again. Yeah. These boundaries, not helpful. Yeah. Not helpful.
But there's that fear. And I think about it, and this is more of the standard one that I come across, is the grandparents are afraid to set boundaries of their child just dropping the kid off without any notice, no regard for what's going on in their life and what hobbies they have. They just drop them off. And they're afraid to set boundaries because what if they don't get to see their grandchildren as much? And there's this battle in their mind of, oh my gosh, like, this is so much on me, but I also love my grandbabies and I don't want them to think I don't want to be around them. And that's a very hard thing to really navigate. Granted, ask yourself, is your child reasonable and would that happen? Let's be realistic. Is that a real fear? And if it is, then okay, that makes me very tough. But ultimately, it's going to take some time. This is the boundaries. Rip the Band-Aid off. It might hurt a little bit, but after a while, it's going to be there. And especially if they're that dependent initially to, drop the child off and need your help, they're going to still need that at times. It's not going to completely go away unless they cut off, which is not, it's not healthy. Hopefully we can get into family therapy at that point.
It's interesting as you talk about that. My in-laws are moving into our neighborhood.
You're thinking about dropping your children off on them. Oh, I hope they're listening. Watch out. Boundaries. They
would be okay with me talking about this too. I've been with my husband for, I think this year's 16 years or 17 years.
Wow. Wait, he's put up with you that long?
I know. He's such a saint. And when they were looking at this house, because they found it a few months ago, we were 16 years deep. We had the discussion of, they said, are you okay with us living this close? Are you okay with us being in your neighborhood?
Very nice.
And me also asking, like, I don't know if I directly asked it or not, but here are my worries. What are your worries? And it did come out of, we're afraid you're just going to drop the kids off on our doorstep.
Good for them.
And for Chris and I, like, that would never happen. Like in our brain
going
space.
To until that, but go ahead.
Yes. Yep. Shh, don't tell. But for them, it's a real fear.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that fear existed until they were able to name it.
Yeah.
And so when we can name it with one another, we can give light to that.
And this is an important, what you're talking about. That does not happen without healthy communication from the get-go and being okay without getting defensive and really being curious about each other's fears and just being okay with it. It might be different.
It took a long time to get there. Okay. So when we started this in-law, daughter-in-law relationship, it wasn't so great.
Yeah.
Right. And even now we have our speed bumps. That is normal. So give yourself patience. I don't expect anybody to have a natural relationship with their in-laws.
Yeah.
Or we can just easily come and discuss boundaries. It takes work. It takes lots of olive branches, lots of trying, even when we don't feel like it. But it's interesting that you bring that one up because that is a fear.
It is. Yeah. The boundaries go both ways. And I'm glad that they were able to speak to what they needed in that context. I think about Everybody Loves Raymond and in the beginning where they hurry up and like, lock the doors. And then the hand comes through the mail slot and
his mom.
Yeah. So, it's very interesting. So this isn't just unidirectional. It comes down to the conversations that we're having. And again, I hope that the couple unit can find ways to be a unified front, letting the partner whose parents it is take the lead. But there are times, again, that we've said before, where the partner actually might have to set boundaries, whose parents it's not, right? Can you think of examples where that?
Like real time, right? If I'm with my in-laws
in the moment,
and a boundary is violated and I need to name it in real time. Also, for me, setting boundaries comes a heck of a lot more natural than my partner. So for him, it took him a few years, not days, not weeks, years, to get comfortable setting those boundaries. And so being patient with him in that process too. So helping him along the way, encouraging it, supporting or filling in when I needed to.
Yeah.
But now he's much more comfortable setting those boundaries. He's also more comfortable setting boundaries with my family, which was important.
Yeah,
right?
that is
word teamwork.
That is important too. And I think we touched on it a little bit, but let's dive deeper into that in particular, because that's really, I think, where it starts is understanding where each other are comfortable with their boundaries. Like my wife, I think she has a little bit more rigid boundaries in that regard compared to me.
Sure.
And this goes back to what we talked about, the expectation of, I wish she had more of a relationship with my parents, but that's just not her. That's not her boundaries. And that is something that needs to happen before you get married, for the long term. And is that something that you're okay with? Right. Or are you wanting this individual, your partner, to have like a deeper connection with yours and what that, so that difference can be a place of contention. And it also, think about this, is that if that partner who has more loose boundaries and spends more time, has no problem with their parents might ask, well, why isn't your partner involved?
Yeah.
Why isn't your partner involved? Why are they, or maybe the opposite. Why is your partner calling us all the time? We talk to your partner more than you.
It's real.
Yeah.
It gets complicated. Or what if my boundaries with my parents look different than with my in-laws?
Yeah.
That's a real thing too.
Yeah.
Boundaries vary by relationship. They vary by the risk of the relationship, by the health of the other people. So naturally, the way we interact with people, the boundaries we set are going to vary too.
Yeah. In the process of trying to understand what these look like, to get a better sense of how we want to move forward with them, that curiosity and try to understand it is not like a personal thing of they're just trying to annoy us or whatever. In the example that the in-laws are trying to be invasive, right, or perceived as invasive. What is going on? Like, what are some cultural things? Are there generational things that might be going on? And really ask yourself, like, what do they need? What do they need to feel validated in your life? And asking that.
Maybe a sense of loss at marriage, right? Now my child does have this other
cut the umbilical cord.
I know. But they may not be ready to do it, right? It doesn't mean they're not going to, but it means that they're not ready.
Yeah.
So talking about it as a partnership. I think another big piece is part of that, at least in the way we view our family or our culture, is having my back and me having his back. So if his parents violate my boundaries, or my dad violates his boundary or our children's boundaries, do I have his back? Does he have my back?
And how are you allowed to go about that with respecting your partner's wishes? So, going back to the example of where you're setting boundaries in real time, like that's not your parents, but something happens in real time and you want to set boundaries because your partner's not, at least having some discussion beforehand of what that looks like if you were to set boundaries, so they can be comfortable with it too and have your back in that moment. And maybe they don't have your back in that moment, but at least show that up front and maybe talk about it later outside of that context.
So important. I was just going to say that. Chris and I have this, I don't want to say rule, but this understanding of we're both going to screw up at times. We're both going to put our foot in our mouth at times. Don't call me out in front of my parents or yours. Have my back in that moment. And then in private say, hey girl, that wasn't so good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, just like with kids, we're a united front. We want to present as such. We can have disagreement, but that doesn't have to involve the other people.
Yeah. And it comes down to just respecting your own boundaries and what you need as a couple unit, but also respecting your in-laws boundaries.
Yep.
And your parents' boundaries and what that looks like. And that is ever changing. It's never just let's set it and forget it. It could be changing based on needs. And going back to the example of the parents are sick. Now, we're the only one of our siblings to have maybe a house that has space. Like, do we bring them in? Like, do we want it? What's that capacity we're willing to take on as a couple unit?
How long?
And for
what
how
are the
long?
Parameters?
Yeah. And if you are to, what are some ground rules and things like that to respect space? And it can look different, right? And sometimes I know, and partners are going to feel like they're powerless in this because their child is their partner. So the child of his parents is very adamant about, I cannot, I need to have my parents here. But hopefully these are things that are talked about earlier on in relationships. And something we'll kind of bring up again in the premarital episode where we talk about premarital counseling
and you model those for your kids. So a big piece of the boundaries, again, speaking of my marriage, is we model for our girls what boundaries look like, how to respect them, how to hold them, and how to remain a team, even if behind closed doors we might disagree. It's really important, at least for our home and our culture, that our kids see that our kids learn that. Because one day I might be that clingy mother-in-law. I might not be ready to let go of my
Let's take away the word might. I think there's a will there. Will be this clingy mother.
I tell myself all the time, I'm never going to be that mother-in-law, but in the back of my head, I'm totally going to be that mother-in-law. And so I want my daughters, as much as I cringe saying this, I want them to be able to set a boundary with me, to tell me that they've got their own decisions to make.
Yeah.
Because that's a healthy part, at least the way we see it, of running a family.
Yeah. I think that's great. One thing that is more anecdotal, I'm just curious of your observation, but through my work over the last decade, working with couples and even individuals talking about their relationships, the in-law issue I tend to see in heterosexual couples between the husband's mom and their wife. Is that, what are your observations? I mean, it happens all around, but that one is very predominant that I see a lot.
There's the term monster-in-law. There's a movie, I think it's literally called Monster-in-Law. It's, I think, so prevalent that there's literally a term for it. Yeah. It's a tough one. And I think naturally women are more catty, are more nurturing on the flip. Like they want to stay connected to their loved ones. And that shows up in their relationships, whereas by and large, men are much more easygoing and tolerant. I wish that weren't true. Again, this is by and large, I'm stereotyping here.
Anecdotal. This is from just observations. Yeah.
But I see it in clients. I felt it in our own family system. It comes up a lot.
And I see it more when there's an unhealthy attachment between the husband and their mom. It's typically when I see it, and more of the mom, almost like this battle of replacing the mom when there's an unhealthy attachment. Yep. So,
and almost, I talk about it with my husband as like pissing in my litter box. If you have cats, you know what I'm talking about. It's territory, right? So it's the sharing of territory. Can we share this one commodity, the son? Or are we fighting over him?
Have you seen this with father and son-in-laws with their daughter in heterosexual relationships? Because I think about that protective dad, right? Like my baby girl.
Yes, I've seen it, but it's much more rare. Like I think of like the guy sitting on his porch with a rifle every time a new boy comes. That's what I think of with that. Yeah. And like getting involved anytime they have a spat of telling this man to like ship up or shape out. Yeah. Shape up or ship out. You get my point. Yeah. I see it, but it's much less frequent. Yeah. Huh. Definitely not in our house. My dad just likes gardening and is just kind of chill and sits in the background. So I don't know. I've seen it very rarely. Yeah. Interesting. Now I'm like thinking about it. Or even like dad and son or mother and daughter. Mother and daughter, I do see that one pop up every once in a while of wanting time with daughter, but husband also wants time, or husband wants to keep relationship private. And daughter is always opening up to mom about the intimacy of the relationship or that sort of thing.
Oh my gosh. You just brought up a whole other can of worms that I think is important with the in-laws. There's this term in our world called triangulation. And it's this idea of when you have a conflict with, say, in your relationship and you triangulate a third person in. I've seen, and I think this is unhealthy, but this is something that needs to be talked about in the couple relationship, and even a boundary set by the in-laws of the like your daughter-in-law or son-in-law complaining about their child to you. Ooh. I've seen this quite a bit.
Interesting.
And completely unhealthy.
Completely unhealthy.
Completely. So that's triangulating in, trying to buy favoritism, but it puts the in-laws in a very odd position, because here they are wanting to support, but at the same time, like, that's my child you're talking about, right? Not the best outlet. And so, you know, that one's always intriguing to me, because it's like, well, what is the function for telling them that?
Interesting.
Like, do you feel like they'll persuade their child? Like, I know, you know, that's more of exploratory, but it's I've seen that come up. And of course, we talk about boundaries and that being, okay, we don't want to triangulate anyways, but especially with the in-laws. So,
or even siblings.
Oh, goodness. Yep.
Like involvement of sisters or brothers.
Yeah.
That can be a sticky point.
Yeah.
Of maybe like I have clients who don't want their partner's siblings around their kids for one reason or another, or they just don't get along. They clash. Again, that fighting over this commodity.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? How do you navigate when one person says like, I want my brother or sister involved, and the other partner's like, no, they're not healthy. They're not good for our kids. They set a bad example, but they're my family.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that? In-laws aren't just the parents, right? It's the whole system that we step into.
Yeah.
It makes my head spin. And I think about literally almost every couple I've met with, this comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad we're talking about it today, and we'll be talking about it again in future episodes, as always. So.
Well, if anyone has any questions about this or have any thoughts or feedback, we are always happy to help. Feel free to send those or topic suggestions to relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. And we look forward to chatting with you next time about all things relationships.
Thanks.